We are the higher self of the one, known to this instrument in the language terms as Thaddeus, who incarnated on this timeline on 1984 of the linear time-space continuum. We greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. And before we begin to communicate with you, we would like to warn you that you should only accept insights which provide a deeper sense of resonance with your inner heart, and leave behind those which do not resonate with your inner heart. We are, in essence, communicating through this instrument from the density of sixth density consciousness for the purpose of allowing experiences on this level of incarnation sequence. Furthermore, we are now going to share with you one timeline of the soul evolutionary cycle of this entity. However, before we transmit this information with regards to this entity's soul evolutionary cycle, we would like to warn each of you listening to the message that there is free will, and this entity also has the free will to accept or reject any of these insights. This entity, throughout its development cycle, as it began to rise up through the various levels of densities, had to learn many lessons specifically concerning the aspect of the control of the self. As it began to rise up through the densities, self-control is an important aspect which must be mastered by each entity. And without self-control, no entity would be able to rise up into higher levels of consciousness, as self-control of the emotional aspect, as well as the self-control of the energy centers and interaction with other entities, will lead entities to have an inner transformation of the experiences around the environment. Furthermore, throughout each soul evolutionary cycle, each entity is able to transcend and learn many of the lessons and interact with other entities in different densities as well. Many a times, this entity, known in the language terms as Thaddeus, has interacted with other entities in astral states or in dream states, wherein this entity has come in contact with its own self in the various levels of incarnation sequences. Furthermore, we are now going to share with you one timeline only of the soul evolutionary cycle of this entity, who started its first entity experiences after originating from the one creator on the Arcturus star system around 8 million years ago, and this entity was known by the soul name of Robana, as known in your language terms, and this entity spent a large portion of the first density life cycle in the form of the fire element, specifically learning the lessons of interaction with other entities of a similar level of density in the first density consciousness. During this life cycle, it also learned the lessons of beingness, specifically The aspect of beingness which is important to be mastered and learned by each entity was mastered in this incarnation, and after a period of around 1200 years, on this level of consciousness, this entity graduated into the beginning stages of the second density, which is the density of the basic building block of awareness, and which leads and allows entities to have a basic aspect of inner awakening. Furthermore, this entity, after learning many of the lessons on the second density stage and reaching into the later stage of second density, began to learn the lessons in the form of a animal complex. And the main purpose of this incarnation sequence was to allow it to learn the lesson of interaction in a hierarchical system of consciousness, which must be understood by each entity before having the ability of entering into the third density, which is the density of choice and the density of self-awareness. This entity then, after a period of 5,000 years and multiple cycles of incarnations on this level of second density, graduated into the third density of choice and of self-awareness, wherein it began to experience the reality which may be considered equivalent to that of this density also. After approximately 8 incarnations later, this entity began to learn the lessons of the third density of choice, and this soul, after reaching the required density level of third density, was transported to the Earth's Atlantean complex, wherein it began to experience the later stages of the third density and started to learn the lessons of the choice of choosing the path of polarity in the third density. This furthermore allowed this entity to learn the lessons as it moved upward in the spiral of third density consciousness. And finally, after reaching into the later stages of the third density, after learning the lessons of the choice and polarizing into the positive, this entity was transported to the Earth's Humanity Collective, wherein it began to learn the lessons in the form of a human mind, body, and spirit totality. This entity then incarnated on the first incarnation on 1807 in the form of a woman body complex known as Kimzan. On that level of incarnation, its main objective was to learn and to understand the aspect of forgiveness. However, this entity was not able to learn the lessons of forgiveness on this level of consciousness. Hence, this entity crossed over on the timeline of 1880, after which it reincarnated into another timeline on 1914, again to learn the lessons of forgiveness in the form of a man-body complex known as Vivekanandam, and it was able to learn the lessons on this level in the form of a farmer entity. And after learning the lessons of forgiveness in the basic aspect on this level, crossed over on the timeline of 1982, after which this entity reincarnated on the current timeline on 1984, And the main purpose of this life cycle for this particular entity is to learn to choose the path of love rather than of fear. And we can already sense this entity has learned many of the lessons in this catalytic environment, as the lessons are meant to awaken many entities. Furthermore, it can also assist in helping other entities to awaken once it fully transitions into the fourth density vibration, thereby becoming of assistance to humanity. Hence, we leave you now in love light of the One Creator, Adonai.